Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. It's that time of year again. It's December. What happens in December? This is the time when we don't get many games coming out, so we resort to the classics. And by the classics, I mean not classic games as much as we should. I should go into GOG and pick up something that I haven't played in a while. Alpha Centauri looks somewhat inviting. That's always inviting. That's a dangerous thing, though. That's where time disappears into some kind of vortex and is never to be seen again. An opportunity perhaps to play Witcher 2, not an old game, but considered by many to be a classic already. No, that's not what we do. What we do is we resort to the old tried and true methods of content generation, such as top 10 lists. Top 10 lists will never go out of style. There is an incessant and some would argue insipid demand for these easily digested ranking systems, which generate an absurd amount of community feedback, which is wonderful for everyone because we get more views and we make more money, and that's how the top 10 system works. And I've been doing them for actually longer than you might think. Some people would say, oh, you started doing them in 2010. Not true, actually. Ever since I started to do general gaming podcasts, and I believe I started those really back in 2008, that is when I started doing these top 10s. I did a lot of them, and once again, I shall be doing my top 10 games that I enjoyed playing in 2012. I felt last year that I had to qualify it by that. Did it help with the arguments? No, absolutely it did not. But that is the sole qualification for the games that reach this particular chart. Which games did I enjoy playing the most in 2012? There are no other requirements. It doesn't matter if the game was well rated. It doesn't matter if it received universal acclaim and various awards. That's not what this list is all about. It's what I like to play this year. The only other requirement is that it came out this year. That's it. Done. That is the whole thing. Commence the arguing. Before I start off, we should have a look at some honorable mentions. Last year it was some dishonorable mentions. I wouldn't say that the games that made their way there were bad, it's just they weren't games that I particularly enjoyed playing. So this year we have another 2 games that will not be making my top 10 list, and it could be an honorable mention, I suppose. The first one being Spec Ops: The Line. Considering the storyline, I would say very much a dishonorable mention. Now, this is a game that I would not say I enjoyed playing, but it was easily one of my games of the year, and the reason being that the subject matter for this game is too goddamn dark to say that I really enjoyed this game. Spec Ops is not a game that you enjoy. In many ways, it's very mediocre. It's a good game to play. It's a very beautiful game. The shooting mechanics are average at best, but it's the character development, it's the storytelling, and the absolutely horrific set pieces and events that you have to travel through that really makes this game an experience. And that's what it is. It is an experience. It is not a enjoyable game. If you run through this game and have fun with everything you're doing, then quite frankly, either you're playing it wrong or you're just borderline psychopathic, because the way the game was designed was clearly not meant to make you feel that way. It was designed to make you feel very uncomfortable. You start off as a protagonist that really anyone could relate to if they've played modern military shooters in any capacity, but as he goes through the game, his character development takes a turn for the borderline deplorable. In fact, let's just throw the borderline out of there. Downright deplorable, despicable behavior. I don't want to talk any more about it, really, because it's a game that you have to experience, and I certainly don't want to spoil it too much for you, but all I can say is that while Spec Ops: The Line was certainly one of my games of the year, it was undoubtedly not a game that I enjoyed. Far from it. It is a very grim, very heavy, and quite frankly, rather depressing title. The other game which will not be making it onto this list, regardless of the fact that I played an awful lot of it, would have to be XCOM. The reason XCOM doesn't get to go on the list is simply because this game has generated more frustration than I think it has enjoyment for me. I've put over 80 hours into this game, and yet it continues to throw bad design decisions and horrible, buggy gameplay at me across the board. And recently, they have released story-based DLC, which is a downright cash grab and absolutely dreadful. So as much as I have played this game, I feel it would be nothing but an absolute disservice to put it in the top 10 games that I enjoyed, because it would be a lie, because most of that time I wasn't actually enjoying it at all. I wanted to, I had the desire to enjoy it, and there were certainly many times where I had fun with that game, but that was matched up with an equal or even greater number of frustrating and horrible aspects, including the way that line of sight works in that game, the frequent bugs, the absolute BS in terms of the aliens getting a free move, and all sorts of design decisions that detracted from the overall XCOM experience. And while it is a solid game, it does not make my list for those reasons. Alright folks, without further ado, now that the honorable or indeed dishonorable mentions are out of the way, it is time to begin the list. The top 10 games that I enjoyed in 2012. Number 10. Torchlight II. I think it's safe to say that this game deserved a spot on the list. I've spent a great deal of time playing it, and it was, in fact, what I would say would be the first game of its kind that really drew me in. This is a genre that I always think to myself I should enjoy, the Diablo style of hack-and-slash action RPG, and yet I find myself consistently being bored by it. Why? I don't really know. I played a lot of Diablo 2, and yet I wasn't really engaged by it. I was playing it primarily at a LAN just because everyone else was playing it. The gameplay didn't really grab me all that much. The storyline I found to be fairly irrelevant. There only seemed to be one interesting character in it. And overall, my opinion of that particular genre, and indeed of the series, was that of indifference. But I liked the idea of getting cool loot. I liked the idea of being a stompy badass. I liked the idea of being able to customize my builds, and yet no game really grabbed me in a way that would actually keep me playing for longer than a couple of hours, until of course Torchlight 2 came along. As far as I'm concerned, Torchlight 2 is kind of the apex of what can be achieved with a Diablo-style action RPG. Of course, developed by the team that brought you Diablo 2 and Lord of Destruction, having then left Blizzard North, founded Flagship, and then becoming Runic later on. These guys know what they're doing when it comes to loot fests. They know what they're doing when it comes to mobs exploding and showering the player in gold and great items. They know what they're doing when it comes to creating a world that doesn't really tell a story all that well, but is still interesting to adventure through and explore, and all manner of different things pop out at you and can be experienced. They also know how to create a nicely balanced game that is not an overly ridiculous gear check, and they know how to properly set up difficulty levels so the game is challenging from the very start, rather than staggering the challenge through 4 different difficulty levels. By the time you get to Inferno, you're probably bored stiff, and yes, of course, I'm talking about Diablo 3. You get the idea. Torchlight 2 was and still is a very enjoyable co-op experience. It is smooth, it is colorful, it runs on pretty much anything. It's got some of the best and most interesting loot and character skill customization I've seen in a game, and I'm very excited indeed to see what 2013 holds for this game as the modding scene continues to develop. Number 9. Transformers Fall of Cybertron. Funny that I should mention this, because I'm pretty sure this had a spot in my top 10 games of 2010, and rightfully so, but Fall of Cybertron is by far the superior title between that and War for Cybertron. It is a better PC port, it is a better paced title, it provides a massive variety of excellent third-person action, and it does an almost unprecedented job at immersing you into the Transformers universe. It's very rare that a licensed game actually has the ability to do that. It's even rarer when you see not 1 but 2 games in a licensed series able to do that. And honestly, I feel that Fall of Cybertron did so much better than its predecessor. Excellent voice acting across the board, great storytelling, and the pacing is what really sells this game, and something which is frequently understated, the notion being that you can indeed have too much of a good thing, and you should properly pace out the various sections of your game to make sure people don't get bored. That is exactly what Fall of Cybertron managed to do. It provided you with a wide variety of different sections, each with different gimmicks and control methods and Transformers to control, and it never outstayed its welcome at any point. That's what really impressed me about it. It would be very easy to do an hour-long Bruticus section of destroying everything, and yet, you know, it would probably get boring after the first 15 minutes and the fact that the novelty had worn off by that point. So you know what? They didn't do it. They gave you him for about 10 minutes, and that was pretty much about it. And they said, here's 10 minutes of awesome, now we're going to get on with something else. And you know what? That's going to be equally cool in a different way. Huge expansive levels, a very nicely paced game with a great plot, great voice acting, and stellar visuals, as well as a pretty comprehensive and complete multiplayer package make this easily my favorite licensed title of 2012. Number 8. Dishonored. I've liked Arkane's games for a while, but they haven't made all that many of them, and they tend to stumble just a little bit. Dark Messiah is probably one of my favorite first-person stabbers. There aren't all that many of them, honestly, and it resulted in many hilarious moments, regardless of its somewhat buggy and in places mechanically questionable nature. However, Dishonored, the new title from Arkane, really tightens things up and provides a wonderful Victorian and steampunk-inspired world to explore. Dunwall is an intriguing city full of interesting and depraved characters. The plotline is pretty good, regardless of the fact that it's a very simple, oh god, you must take revenge on everything kind of affair. That's not what's really important. It's how you do it that is the most vital, and the level design is nothing short of spectacular. The ability to blink almost anywhere bypasses many of the traditional trappings of first-person platforming, something that's very difficult to do correctly. Thankfully, the ability to just teleport around and explore the rooftops and places within this absolutely fantastic, but of course plague-ridden and rather dark city is an opportunity that, as far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't really be missing out on. I'm looking forward to its future DLC, and hopefully an expansion of some of the game's weaker points, such as the lack of non-lethal combat variety, and some would argue the actual length of the story-based content, although I would say if you've rushed your way through the game, then quite frankly you have somewhat missed the point. This is a game about exploring and finding out everything that's going on in this world, even if you're not being directly told. It's a wonderful game. It's got great stealth mechanics, simple but effective, as well as some rather excellent variety when it comes to assassination techniques. Although, of course, some would criticize, myself included, that the most interesting ways of dispatching people are also the ways that lead you to the worst ending, which is perhaps not so ideal. Regardless, an absolutely wonderful original IP from Arkane, extremely well executed with a fantastic PC port, and most assuredly worthy of your time. Number 7. Blacklight Retribution. Gotta get a free-to-play game in there. Hell, we might even have more than one. This is an incredibly well-polished first-person shooter by the guys that brought you Blacklight Tango Down. Not exactly the greatest pedigree, is it not? That was a game that had a couple of interesting ideas, but was bogged down by absolutely awful execution. However, Blacklight Retribution pretty much popped out of nowhere and provided an astonishing AAA shooter experience set in a dystopian cyberpunk-esque world with some rather interesting weapons, abilities, and, of course, level design. And this is something that a lot of people really didn't expect. You don't usually expect a free-to-play game to come along that actually has the quality of premium shooters, and more to the point, is actually more interesting than premium shooters. This is a game that is more interesting than games like Black Ops. It just offers more. It goes that little bit further. It offers much better weapon customization. It offers a lot of very interesting game modes, including things like a siege mode, which involves escorting a giant spider tank, and all sorts of really interesting things. It just seems to crank everything up to 11. It's got mechs, rocket launchers, airstrikes, viable melee weapons, cloaking devices, auto turrets, and all sorts of really awesome things. And the fact of the matter is the game is free and allows for you to rent pretty much any gear in the game for a fairly low in-game credit price, which is a nice way of getting around the notion that people that have played for longer will have better guns than you do. It is surprisingly well balanced. The developers have clearly paid attention to community feedback and have constructed an interesting variety of items, maps, game modes, and indeed are continuing to push this game forward as being one of the premium and premier shooters on the PC in 2012 going into 2013. I personally wish them every success, and I've had a hell of a lot of fun so far in Blacklight Retribution. Number 6. CounterStrike GO. Well, it was unexpected to see the developers of the tower defense game Defense Grid come up with a game like CounterStrike GO, and that's what they were contracted to do by Valve, and you know what? They pulled it off in fine style. What we've got here is a game that takes the traditional Counter-Strike formula, enhances it with new items, and yet also keeps the competitive edge and spirit. Not only that, but it gives you so many different ways to actually get into Counter-Strike as a game. CS sounds like a very accessible game. It's free, you just go in, you pick up a gun and you go, right? There's actually a lot more to it, and it's a game that has an awful lot of depth. It's a game that has a fairly large wall which you have to climb in order to actually be any good at it. However, CSGO provides various different game modes that are designed to actually teach you the game while still providing you an experience which is not watered down. Arms Race, of course, the quintessential gun game mode, available in an absolutely wonderful form with tons of different guns to try in some rather close quarters and brutal maps. That's personally my favorite mode that I've played hundreds of rounds on. We can also, of course, talk about Demolition Mode, a great way of providing the core Counter-Strike experience of terrorist, counter-terrorist, bomb plant, bomb defusal, and yet taking out the economy element and making the map smaller and a little bit quicker so you can get into the next round much, much faster. As well as, of course, preserving the competitive experience that we know and love. It will no doubt not please the hardcore crowd for Counter-Strike 1.6 because nothing ever will, but as far as I'm concerned, they did a great job, and as someone that's never really liked Counter-Strike, CSGO was the point when I decided, you know what? No, this game actually has some really serious viability, and I can appreciate it and enjoy it, even if I don't necessarily want to play the classic competitive mode. Number 5. Awesome Noughts by Ronimo. And the reason that I've put this here, aside from the fact that I'm getting a character in it, which is kind of cool, it's got nothing to do with that. It's more down to the fact that what they've managed to do is take the Dota-style formula and finally put it into some kind of formula that's both viable and not completely rage-inducing all the time. What you've essentially got is a very casual version of the Dota experience, yet one that still requires a great deal of skill, both in terms of aiming, dodging, and platforming. What this results in is a surprisingly skill-based 3-on-3 MOBA-style game whereby you actually pick the items you're going to be able to purchase prior to going into the game, so that simplifies the whole loadout process. So essentially anyone can get into the game, quickly buy their stuff without having to worry too much about the notion of not buying the right items. And even then, with all of these kind of casual elements and what even some people could describe as dumbing down, you still have a pretty skillful game because you're still dodging shots, you're still using neat platform tricks to try and escape and flank your opponent, you're still having to aim every skill, there's no clicking involved, so even though it's pretty casual, it's still quite skillful, and it gives you these really cool clutch moments whereby you can clearly see that you won thanks to pure Twitch skill and nothing else. Games generally take about up to 20 minutes, and the drop-in, drop-out nature of the game is certainly helpful, although it can run into a few problems. I've seen frequent instances of people bailing out of the game, being replaced by bots, and then the bots not being good enough to justify being part of your team. In fact, all they end up doing is feeding the opposition, which is certainly not ideal. I'd also like to see more maps in the game. There are a few, and pretty much all of them are good in their own way, but I'd certainly like to see a few more. Aside from that, though, what you've got is a game that has amazing character. They've got heroes which are incredibly well designed. Each has their own theme music, they're well voice acted, and they're certainly out of the ordinary, to say the least. The whole Saturday morning cartoon feel that they've got going on with the game is very unique indeed. It's well presented, and overall the game is an absolute blast to play. It does help that all the heroes are free, and the game only costs $10 as well. So as far as I'm concerned, it's certainly worth having a look at, and it has a healthy multiplayer community on PC, which is currently where the development priorities are, since it doesn't cost you about $40,000 to update on PC. It's funny how that works, isn't it? So, plenty of free content, lots of development support there from Ronimo, and an excellent casual Dota-style game for you to play on PC. Awesome Noughts is highly recommended. Number 4. Planetside II, probably the most recent addition to this particular list considering it did not come out a long time ago. Planetside II is a massively multiplayer first-person shooter. There aren't exactly all that many of them, and it does it in fine style. It's not surprising to find this on my list, honestly. If you know anything about my history, Planetside was actually the first MMO I played, and I played it for several years. I was big into it, and I loved the concept even if the execution was a little bit wonky at times. Planetside 2 comes along and says, you know what, we can nail the execution this time around and still provide these absolutely huge, persistent battles going on, and I am having some of my best times in Planetside 2 just as I had some of my best times in Planetside. Why is that? Because coordinated ops with all of your friends and a massive outfit is a ton of fun. That's what MMOs are supposed to be about. Being able to play with hundreds and thousands of players and compete against other guys in a persistent world. And more often than not, that's not what MMOs are anymore. They seem to be more single-player focused experiences with optional 5 or up to 25-man content. You want to hear about 25-man content? We do 100-man content every night when it comes to doing big operations and huge invasions of pretty much wherever we want in the Planetside 2 universe. We can come crashing down with bombers, tanks, bikes, everything you can possibly imagine, and it's wonderfully fun to see. It's an epic experience that is not replicated by any other game currently on the market. In terms of scale, everything's just bigger. It's got a bigger map, it's got more people, it's got bigger facilities to fight over, it's got bigger vehicles with more capacity. It is just bigger. And as a direct result, it happens to be a lot of fun. But wait, it's also free, and one of the fairest free-to-play models we've seen in shooters for quite some time. I'd certainly like to see the weapons go down in price, there's no real question about that. It does certainly take a while to get the in-game certification points to unlock them, but what I will say is the default weapons are very, very good, so it's not really required in order to unlock those side grades. Sony is already adding new content into the game. We can expect more continents, vehicles, and all sorts of upgrades going forward. And after a rocky beta, they had a fairly successful launch that was about as smooth as you could have expected. An absolutely great-looking game that plays fantastically well and gives you this unique experience of being able to cooperate with hundreds of people to destroy your objective in a first-person shooter environment. Well, good luck finding that anywhere else when it comes to PC gaming. Planetside 2 is worthy of your attention, and you can check it out for free on Steam right now and engage in some absolutely massive scale carnage. Number 3. FTL. Faster Than Light has been a game that I've indulged in and enjoyed a great deal since its release, and the thriving modding scene is certainly helping out in that respect. It is a roguelike-ish space sim whereby you have to fly your spaceship all the way through to the end of the sector and deliver a message to High Command and then defeat the rebel flagship. Sounds easy. Well, it is not. There are randomized elements within the game. Each trip is a little bit different. You travel through randomized sectors, fighting enemies and dealing with various different events, upgrading and equipping your ship with various different items, and trying your best to not die horribly. And honestly, it's the dying horribly that makes the game interesting. Of all the playthroughs, I believe I've only beaten it on the highest difficulty once. I was able to do that on stream, which was indeed shocking to me. And this game will kill you. Once you die, that's it. It is game over. You must start again. But starting again is one of the most fun things you can do because you never know what to expect the next time around. Some people have complained that it's not really a roguelike. The game is just actually flat out unfair. But I don't necessarily believe that. You can certainly come upon bad luck, but for the most part, you do end up making your own luck with the decisions that you make throughout the game, and more often than not, it is possible to escape from battles that you feel are not going your way. It does provide this really great Space Command feel to it, which is something that we don't get in a lot of modern games, unfortunately. I would love to see more of that, but FTL is certainly going to have to do for now, and thankfully, it it does so in fine style with great music, nice pixel art, plenty of micromanagement, as well as a lot of replayability thanks to a bunch of very different unlockable ships, and of course the modding scene, which is continuing to develop new events, ships, and scenarios for this particular title. FTL is most assuredly worth your time, and at only $10, it is a very attractive prospect indeed for those of you looking to get the feel of being a starship commander against all odds. It's truly fantastic and well worth your time. Number 2. Persona 4 Golden, the only console-specific title to make its way onto my list, and with good reason, because this game has been devouring my life for the past few weeks. Persona 4 Golden is the definitive version of Persona 4, an RPG by Atlus that came out on the PlayStation 2, and has now just very recently been re-released on the PlayStation Vita. The only reason I've really had to get my Vita out lately and actually play it, aside from PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, this game is a thoroughly engrossing JRPG. And what makes it different from your average JRPG is the way that character development works and the fact that it mixes in a social simulator element, which is, in fact, arguably the best part of the game, with the more traditional dungeon crawling and turn-based battle mechanics of your average JRPG. It does character development really, really well. It fleshes out the characters very nicely, there's a lot of depth to them, there's a lot of complexity, which you are able to explore, but it links that into gameplay mechanics. The more that you go out of your way to explore and find out who these people are and what makes them tick, the more powerful certain elements of your game will actually become. And that is essentially mandatory, at least in certain aspects. You do have choices about who you decide to get really interested in and who you decide to leave by the wayside. The first couple of hours of this game are hyperlinear. There are no choices to be made whatsoever, but after that the game opens up, and I've probably put about 40 hours into this game, and I am maybe halfway through what the game has to offer. The golden version is the definitive version with extra content across the board, as well as plenty more dungeons to explore, and I think the biggest thing about this game, and that just discards all the stuff about the character development, the voice acting, the amazing localization, the enjoyable JRPG battle mechanics, the interesting enemy design. It all comes down to what happens when you take something really normal and then you contrast it to something really out of the ordinary. And since you spend a lot of time in the dungeons, it's actually a welcome break to get out of the dungeon and go back to a regular lifestyle where you're going to school, you're trying to pass exams, you're working on friendships with friends, you're working part-time jobs, and all sorts of things like that. There's plenty of choices to be made in this game. There's an awful lot of different activities to be involved in this game, and it's been a very long time since I've enjoyed a JRPG. In fact, the one that I enjoyed the most that I can remember in recent memory, and that's recent, this is like 4 or 5 years ago, was in fact Dragon Quest VIII. I'd say that was the last JRPG I really enjoyed, and Persona 4 Golden has got me very interested in the Shin Megami Tensei series, looking forward to trying out Persona 3 Portable, as well as looking forward to the forthcoming Persona 5, and this has been a reason to use my PlayStation Vita again, and I'm very glad for having been given that reason there by Atlus. So even if you are not a JRPG fan, you may very well wish to dip into the Persona games, because they are truly different and very enjoyable indeed, as well as being a huge, massive time sink that has kept me awake until 6 a.m. at times. It is that damn good. A recap of my top 10, folks, before I crown the king for 2012 as regards to the games that I enjoyed the most this year. At number 10, we had Torchlight II. Number 9, Transformers Fall of Cybertron. Coming in at number 8, Dishonored, followed by Blacklight Retribution at number 7. CounterStrike Global Offensive holds strong at number 6, whereas Awesome Noughts comes in at number 5. Number 4 goes to Planetside II, followed by FTL at number 3. A strong showing for Persona 4 Golden at number 2 leads us into the ultimate question, which will be the game that I enjoyed the most in 2012. Number 1. Journey. Alright, maybe that was a little bit unexpected. But yes, a 90-minute game exclusive to PlayStation 3 released by that game company, is the game that I enjoyed the most in 2012. Now, I have to explain why, because this is kind of a hipster choice, I suppose, some people will say, for various reasons, and I don't really blame them for saying that. It's like, oh, you just picked it because it was critically acclaimed, blah, blah, blah. No. So, what happened was, this game came out on PlayStation Plus about a week before it came out for anyone else, and I picked it up, having played Flower, the game that game company created previously, and thought, well, this is kind of a nice little toy. And then I picked up Journey, and what I did was I played the whole game through in one session. It's not that difficult. It's about 90 minutes to 2 hours, and this game essentially gives you the task of getting to the end. The end being this strange light on top of a mountain, and in order to get there, of course, you have to experience a journey. You have to traverse various parts of this interesting desert landscape with very clear signs of a dead civilization surrounding you. And you do so by being able to glide, fly, and jump your way through the various obstacles. You even have to avoid certain creatures that are out to murder you horribly. Now, this doesn't sound like it would be all that interesting, but for some reason, and I will do my best to identify what that reason is, Journey is quite literally a game that can evoke emotion in you without saying a word. Now, that is a very difficult thing to do. Storytelling, and indeed the rather arduous subject of whether or not video games are art, has been something that's been troubling the video game space for a great number of years. How do you best tell a story? How do you best evoke emotion in the way that a book, a television show, or a movie can, while also providing an interactive medium? And this is answered by that game company in the form of Journey. This is a game that evokes joy. It also evokes great sadness as well as curiosity. It evokes joy in the sense that it displays this unbelievably beautiful world that you can explore and essentially spend as much time as you want just wandering around, flying around the place, and enjoying and soaking in the visuals as well as the fantastic soundtrack. It also evokes sadness, and to tell you why would of course be a spoiler, but it is done so very well. A word is not expressed, and yet your actions in the game bring you to a point where I absolutely could not help feeling sadness as a result of what had occurred. The wonderful music and aesthetic contributed greatly to that, and there's also a sense of sadness with the world as well. It's a beautiful world, and yet it's a lonely world, at least for a while, and that's where the curiosity element comes in, because of course other players can join in your world. They will not be able to speak to you. You can only communicate via a series of musical tones, but you explore the world with someone else that you've never met before, and then suddenly that person can vanish out of nowhere. He appears from nowhere, and then suddenly you lose track of him, and I felt a great deal of curiosity exploring the world with this person, and then a tinge of sadness when I lost track of him, and that person was never to be seen again. I assume him or her, it's hard to say, of course, because the actual character in this game is not necessarily male or female, and it was a 90-minute experience that I will quite frankly never forget. It's burned into my mind. I remember almost everything that happened. I remember the first character I ever met. I remember saying, hey, what's going on here? Trying to interact with them, showing them new places, exploring alongside them, and even trying to help them out because, of course, there is a cooperative element. I remember losing that guy. I remember all of the different elements of the game and the various areas that I had the chance to explore. I remember the soundtrack in great detail and the sheer joy I felt actually playing through that game. I remember the ending being one of the most satisfying things in recent memory, and of course I remember very sad parts of the game that did genuinely evoke emotion in me, and it's pretty rare to find that. I'm not the kind of person that gets emotional at video games at all, and Journey was that one big exception. It delivered an experience. It didn't just deliver a game, it delivered an experience without falling to the trappings of other experience-based games such as Dear Esther or The Graveyard, which are really not games at all. This was truly a game, and yet also this wonderful experience that, as far as I'm concerned, everyone should have the chance to play, if at all possible. If you have a PlayStation 3, you need to try this out. Turn on your PlayStation Network, make sure that others can get involved, and go and play Journey, because it is incredible in almost every respect. And some might argue that $15 for a 90-minute experience is not reasonable. Well, As far as I'm concerned, I treat it like a movie, and I got way more enjoyment out of that than I've got from any movie that I can remember in the last few years. That game company's put together a masterpiece. It's going to be difficult to top, and as far as I'm concerned, as a direct result of all of those things, that is the game that I enjoyed playing the most in 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, my name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for your support this year. It has meant a lot, and let us see once again what happens in the world of gaming in 2013. I'll see you next time.